at your annotation. 2 or 3 sentences max. They do not want any more.
Welcome to another episode of UEN's PDTV. In this episode, we have traveled to Northwest Middle School in Salt Lake City to talk to Utah's 2025 Teacher of the Year, Sayre Posey.
I teach 8th grade United States history at Northwest Middle School here in the Rose Park neighborhood of Salt Lake City. I love my school because I work with such a unique population to Utah. My students are the children of immigrants and refugees. We have about 90% minority enrollment, and in our school we have about 13 different languages that are spoken.
Throughout this episode, we'll learn how Sayre utilizes personalized learning and instructional technology tools like Scribble and AI to foster a classroom climate of inquiry and growth that supports the diverse needs of her multilingual learners. You've told us a little bit already about the diverse population in your school. You work with multilingual learners. What kinds of strategies do you use to try to meet the diverse needs of all of your learners?
I think it starts with a lot of student choice. And I know for this project specifically, I made sure that when we went to our book tasting in the library and they were looking at like example topics, that they were culturally relevant and also like representative of our student population. And so a lot of my students have been really excited because they're doing a project relating to Chicano history and they had like never heard of that term before. Or they're doing, like I have a student who just moved here from Afghanistan and he's doing his project on his migration story from Afghanistan, literally just 2 months ago. And so when it comes to like scaffolding things for multilingual learners, I think where I start is very explicit instruction in the beginning of the year. I teach a lot of sentence structure in the first quarter because it's the foundation of students to have success in writing paragraphs and multiple paragraphs. A lot of my kids are like, I thought this wasn't language arts, like this is a history class, but history is just as much like a literacy subject, especially when working with multilingual learners. Throughout the year, like especially preparing for WEDA, we end up like kind of pulling back on some of those scaffolds so that students feel successful in these projects and taking the WEDA tests and taking the RISE assessments and writing essays towards the end of the year where they don't feel like they have the tools that they need. They don't need the sentence starters. They can come up with them on their own.
I noticed that there must be a lot of this foundational work that goes into your classroom. You mentioned specifically with language arts and literacy skills that tie into history, but I'm noticing it also just with classroom expectations and classroom culture. How do you build from the start of the year for these students that kind of classroom culture where they feel confident and comfortable in class?
I want to be like a warm demander where like my students feel comfortable in class, but then they also know that like the expectations are like all the way up here. And I think it kind of starts with, in that beginning of the year, teaching explicitly what group work and collaborative work looks like. So that could be like modeling it in class. I give like specific group roles whenever we're doing like a station activity or when kids are doing their first mock trial and they're in groups working on their arguments. Practicing through like reciprocal teaching activities where each student, as we're going through a text, has a different role in summarizing and explaining the text. I think when you explicitly teach and spend weeks explicitly teaching what group work looks like and what being a successful, smart student looks like, then students know that that's the expectation for the whole rest of the year and there isn't any wiggle room.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about more projects that your students are working on. What other examples do you have of what you've done in your classroom and what are they working on today?
I started project-based learning with biography projects for each of the Heritage Months. So we started with a Black History Month project where students got to choose a person, they read a book, and then they created a roadmap of their life. I loved it so much that the next year I went even further, and so I had students start the year by doing their Hispanic Heritage Month project, completing a digital story. And I had just taken a digital story class with UEN, and that was the first course that kind of inspired me to get my ed tech endorsement. And that went so well that after that year I decided I wanted to do National History Day because of a Genius Hour class that I had taken with Kayla Towner. And so National History Day is a grueling historical research project that students typically start in like August or September, and then competitions at the school or regional or state level begin in the spring. So our regional contest that we're attending is in March. And so after picking their topic, students begin by doing some historical research on secondary sources to kind of get the gist of the main event. After they get their main event notes done and they completed research for what happened during the main event of their topic, we move on and start analyzing primary sources and choosing primary sources that align with their category. We're at the stage in our project where my students have finished their research. They've picked their primary sources they're using as evidence for their project, and now they're working on their annotated bibliographies, which is something that I never did until I went to college. So Scribble is really helpful because when you save sources in Scribble and complete your annotations, which are just a sentence about what is the source and then a sentence about how students used it in their project. When you do that in Scribble, it actually makes the entire annotated bibliography for them. And you can sort by primary and secondary sources. It's really easy to just copy and paste over. Students are also able, I have a couple students writing papers, and they're using that feature in Scribble where they can just write their paper, and Scribble allows them to like input their citations for their in-text citations just in their paper already. It takes a while to do our annotations for our primary sources just because there's such a variety of sources that students are using, right? So a student who's making a documentary is probably going to use more photos and visuals and videos than a student who is doing a performance as their project. And so working with students to figure out what are the best primary sources that we can use as evidence for your project is part of, analyzing that evidence and selecting the best visuals and the best primary sources.
I want to come back to this concept, remind everyone that you're doing this immediate in-depth project with multilingual learners who, maybe have a variety of other academic needs, and they're being successful. So say again, how do you do that? How do you support these learners with such a, in-depth research project?
I think hooking them in on their interest is key. And the scaffolds that I have made and provide to my students of varying different levels, that is what gets them through the hard, challenging parts of historical research. So last year I spent probably 2 months making a variety of scaffolded Cornell notes, scaffolded primary source analysis, an annotated bibliography guide, checklists and rubrics for everything, sentence starters for the process paper. The majority of my students are bilingual, multilingual in my gen ed classes, right? And so they're able to use that to their advantage because while I cannot read Spanish primary sources, my students definitely can. Having that multilingual ability is an absolute, benefit. It is something that is good for these students to have doing these projects because I would not be able to guide them on, the primary sources that are most relatable to their research. Another thing that I do is with very specific pacing. So every time we're doing something new, I'm modeling it with my own topic and my own project. So anytime before we start doing our primary source analysis, I'm modeling a primary source analysis for the Montgomery bus boycott, and they're doing that with me. We go on Utah's online library together and find and annotate an article in World Book on the Montgomery bus boycott. So they have those skills and they feel like they know what to do and they've done it before they start doing it for their own project.
You've mentioned some technology tools that help you with all of this as well. Scribble for the research, Utah's online library for finding resources. You also mentioned to me previously that you use AI to help personalize the learning experience. Tell me a little bit about that.
There are so many different topics. There's very few students who chose the same topic as someone else. And so using Magic School, I was able to scaffold specific readings for students who would prefer to read at a specific Lexile score that also supports them as multilingual learners. So Magic School AI was super helpful with that. I was able to pull out specific vocabulary words in like articles in a Gale article that students might not be familiar with, and we were able to use the like dictionary tool in Scribble for students to find the definitions for those words to clarify their understanding of an article. I also used Magic School and a little bit of ChatGPT to help kind of break up and allow me to have an idea of what each section of the project looks like for my students, because they're the experts, not me. And so I used AI to kind of pull out what's the before, the historical context, the during, the main event, and then the historical significance, or we call it the after, before, during, after, of each of these projects, so I can kind of guide them as they're doing their research and in putting together the story of their topic.
So now you can do the information about that. So look at the citation fields. There's going to be stuff that you have to change. So for example, you see how the title is the Houston Post for the article title. The article title is, go back and find it, Convict Leasing System.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what you take then.
I love how all the different tools come into play when you need them, and they're just ready and available to offer the support, both for personalization, for scaffolding, and for creation and for research. So you also mentioned that you have participated in the UEN Educational Technology Endorsement Program. How has that impacted your teaching?
I definitely just signed up for a class to get a lane change, and then as I started taking a few more, the way that I thought about personal competency-based learning and like project-based learning and using technology in the classroom totally changed. I finished my EdTech endorsement last year, and it was super exciting. I never thought I would be somebody who feels excited and comfortable talking about technology in the classroom because of the lack of experience that I had with it. But through those classes, I was able to gain like practice and use tools and create assignments and like have a professor and also a cohort of classmates guiding me along that way, and seeing how other people and reading about how other people are using technology in their classroom was also really beneficial, because I was able to see how other social studies teachers did it, or how other teachers who have multilingual learners use technology in their classroom. I know project-based learning is very scary and intimidating, and it is a lot of behind-the-scenes work, but when you get into the project creation stage, I feel most alive and excited as a teacher, because I am not up front doing direct instruction and just changing the assignment day to day. I'm facilitating learning, and I learn so much from my students. They are truly the teachers in project-based learning through something like National History Day. Last year was the first time we had participated. We went to the regional contest and expected nothing. And we took every single individual exhibit qualifying spot for the state contest, every single one. And so at the state contest, my students were the only students of color in either of their divisions. One of my students was an alternate for the national contest. And another one of my students, she won the American West Prize for her research on the Native American boarding school era. My students were so proud because they felt like they were ambassadors for their community, right? We were one of 2 Title I schools at the state contest in the whole state of Utah to win awards in the junior division. And so my students, I think, in situations where they don't see themselves as academically excelling, well, now they do. And they are academically excelling at really hard, challenging work. I want this to be a pathway to success for all my students to engage in technology, in project-based learning, in personal competency-based learning, in doing something as challenging as an annotated bibliography. All kids can do this with high expectations and strong instruction and strong relationships, both with their educators and each other. So I love this. It has changed the way I teach. And I mean, going all the way back, I have my education technology endorsement to thank for this.
Thank you so much for sharing the work that you're doing here at Northwest Middle School, and we have loved observing you and interacting with you and your students.
Thank you so much, Katie. I have the best kids, and I can be a great teacher just because I have the best kids in the world.
Now that you have seen Sayre and her students in action, consider how you can also create a classroom climate that supports the diverse needs of your learners. First, start by considering the various strategies and techniques that can support your learners. Techniques like personalized and competency-based learning, project-based learning, and universal design for learning. You can learn more about these various strategies by visiting the Utah Education Network or the Utah State Board of Education website. When specifically designing project-based learning activities, be sure to include a lot of opportunities for hands-on and creative learning. Utilize rubrics and scaffolds to support your learners. And as Sayre pointed out, be sure to model each step of the project. And be sure to give students lots of voice and choice in the topics they cover, the way they learn things, and the way they show what they know. There are a lot of technology tools that can support you and your students as well. Specifically, Scribble is a great tool for conducting research. You can also utilize AI tools like Magic School to support personalized learning and provide additional scaffolding for students. You can also utilize digital storytelling tools like those found in the Adobe Suite. Finally, consider participating in UEN's Educational Technology Endorsement Program. You can learn more about the competencies we covered in this episode and all of Utah's EdTech competencies. For even more ideas, resources, strategies, and tools to help you implement these competencies in your classroom, be sure to visit uen.org/pdtv and access the teacher toolkit that accompanies this episode. Thanks for watching UEN's PDTV. To access more professional development resources from UEN and to schedule a training, be sure to visit uen.org/development. We'll see you next time.